To tomorrow, Omaha City Councilman Vinny Palermo and two other defendants in a public corruption case will appear again in federal court in Lincoln.
A judge will determine whether to keep them in jail until trial, which would be months away. And that decision would impact how the council will deal with Palermo going forward. Our Bella Caracta joins us live from the newsroom to break it all down.
John Lauren, today the Omaha City Council voted 5-0 to temporarily remove Vinny Palermo as vice president. As VP, he was second in line of succession to lead the city. That means if Mayor Jean Stothert is out of town, which she is right now, and City Council President Pete Festerson were also to be out of town, which he planned to be this week, Palermo would be acting mayor. With today's resolution, the senior-most member takes that spot. In this case, Amy Melton.
At this point in time, we aren't presuming innocence or guilt. We're simply protecting the potential alleged victims.
Those victims being the people and taxpayers of Omaha.
So there's no harm in protecting the citizens from the allegations that could continue.
The pattern of his past activities and the new allegations of criminal conspiracy, public corruption, and fraud is, to say at the least, very concerning.
Next Tuesday, the City Council will consider whether to make Palermo's removal permanent.
But in the meantime, for the next week, we're at least providing some protections.
He can speak on his behalf at that hearing unless he's kept in jail until trial, which could be determined Wednesday morning in Lincoln. City Council President Pete Festerson and Don Rowe echoed Harding and Melton's concerns. Councilmember Juanita Johnson, who attended Palermo's court appearance Monday, abstained from voting to remove Palermo as VP.
The law clearly states that a person is presumably innocent until proven guilty.
According to the city charter, the council does not have the power to remove Palermo from the council, but he would automatically forfeit his position if the judge decides Wednesday morning to keep him in jail until trial, forcing him to miss 3 months of city council meetings. On your side, in Omaha, Bella Caracta, 6 News.
In court tomorrow morning, Palermo and two of the other defendants will get the opportunity to bring witnesses and argue why they should stay out of jail until trial.